Marvel's Uncanny X-Men number 329 hit store shelves and spinner racks in June of 1996. The same month, The Rock was released in theaters, and this hairstyle was popular among teen boys, myself included. The story is a continuation of issue 328 that saw Psylocke fight Sabretooth within an inch of her life. Now lying helpless on her deathbed, Wolverine joins Archangel, who has been dating Psylocke since issue 319, as they seek alternative means to heal their fellow X-Men. Wolverine takes a begrudging Angel to Little Asia in New York City to meet a mysterious stranger at Susie Cho's tea house. Once inside, the duo are almost immediately attacked by a steam ninja, but quickly uncover the real culprit, Gomurr the Ancient, an old acquaintance of Wolverine. Wolverine, who not so much asks but demands that Gomurr help the duo find a pint of Crimson Dawn from the Ebon vein in order to help Psylocke. Gomurr reluctantly accepts, and as the trio are about to begin their journey, none other than Doctor Strange, in astral projection form, joins their quest. The story continues in issue 330. Uncanny X-Men 329 was written by Scott Lobdell and Jeph Loeb. Lobdell worked on Marvel Comics X-Men related titles, specifically Uncanny X-Men and the spin-off series Generation X. Now, Lobdell's beginnings at Marvel are rather unique. While in college, he started submitting stories to Marvel, but was often rejected by editors, including Tom DeFalco. When DeFalco started editing Marvel Comics Presents, Lobdell submitted a story about a character from Contest of Champions. Because the characters involved are rather obscure, DeFalco did not need to extract approval from other editors, and he decided to give Lobdell a chance. Jeph Loeb is a name most often associated with television, as he was the producer and writer for shows like Smallville and Lost, and co-executive producer on the NBC TV show Heroes. In 1996, Loeb was extremely busy at Marvel. Fresh off his work on Age of Apocalypse crossover storyline in 1995, Loeb also wrote Heroes Reborn version of Captain America in 1996 and 1997. The unique artwork for this issue was created by Joe Madureira. Madureira, at the age of 16 and while still in high school, started at Marvel Comics as an intern. He became the regular penciler on Uncanny X-Men in 1994, during the Age of Apocalypse storyline. He also illustrated Uncanny X-Men's replacement, Astonishing X-Men Volume 1. As a nod to Jack Kirby, when Doctor Strange's astral self floats across the city, he superimposed the drawn figure over a photographic background, which is a really nice touch. This issue is inked by Tim Townsend, who has worked on most of Marvel's major titles at one time or another. His best-known work is with Madureira and Chris Bachalo, with whom he has partnered for the last 22 years on most of the X-Men and Spider-Man titles. Steve Buccellato worked on color. He had been working on Uncanny X-Men since issue 269. You may know Buccellato from his Image Comics creation, Weasel Guy, which was published in 1999. Rounding out the team is Richard Starkings. Richard is a British font designer and comic book letterer, editor, and writer. He was one of the early pioneers in computer-based comic book lettering and is one of the most prolific creators in the industry. During this period, Bob Harras was editor-in-chief of Marvel Comics. Harras' tenure as editor-in-chief occurred at a time when Marvel teetered on bankruptcy around 1996, but we'll get into that later. During his tenure, Harras oversaw titles such as Captain America, Daredevil, Khazar, and Deadpool. Following the Heroes Reborn experiment, where oversight of 4 titles was outsourced to Jim Lee and Rob Liefeld, this was one of the more successful relaunches during Harras' tenure, including The Avengers by Kurt Busiek and George Perez. However, the Spider-Man clone saga, in which Norman Osborn was brought back as the Green Goblin, despite the opposition of many of the writers, received enough negative reception that it overshadowed his critical successes. Joe Madureira turns this pedestrian storyline into a feast of the senses with his manga-like approach to this issue. Everything from the Asian-inspired themes to the exquisite, if a little dated-looking, Steam Ninja has you hooked. We are once again introduced to a never-before-seen ally of Wolverine, indicating, as always, that there is more to him than meets the eye. Warren Worthington isn't given much to do aside from brooding over Psylocke and arguing with Logan. However, seeing the true nature of his injuries in the hands of Sabretooth, which in itself forms the very beginning of the end of his metal wings, proves to Wolverine that Warren isn't just the spoiled brat that he appears to be. This issue marks the first appearance of Tar, the Proctor of the Crimson Dawn. He will later be killed and buried by Gomurr. This is also Gomurr the Ancient's first appearance as well. He would later show up in X-Men Unlimited number 12. Mentioned briefly by Wolverine, the cult of the Crimson Dawn was first discussed in the Doctor Strange story from Marvel Superheroes number 14. During his fight with the Steam Ninja, Wolverine mentions the lack of metal in his body. Wolverine's adamantium skeleton was ripped out of his body by Magneto during the Fatal Attractions crossover, more specifically in X-Men 2nd Series number 25. Electric Crayon's Richard Stew gets a special thanks in the credits for his work on the Steam Ninja. Electric Crayon was a digital coloring company founded by Steve Buccellato, Mark Siri, and Douglas Rosen in 1992. I found mint or near mint issues for sale on mycomicshop.com for as high as $5 and on eBay for $60. Pre-orders for comics in 1996 ranged from 120 to 130 million copies, and a retail price of 300 to 320 million. It's about $601 to $640 million today. Marvel was also venturing out into other mediums. The early 90s saw a whole slew of characters make it to the small screen in the form of animation, energizing a base of fans who had started to notice that the cost of comics was slowly starting to rise. You see, Marvel was selling roughly 5 million units with 55 titles a month. However, all was not well within the industry, and things were about to turn very dark for Marvel Comics. Throughout the early 90s, Marvel had massive success with its Spider-Man and X-Men titles. Sales of a new comic, X-Force, were similarly huge, thanks to a new sales strategy. The first issue came in a polybag with one of 5 different trading cards inside it. If collectors wanted to get hold of all 5 cards, they had to buy multiple copies of the same comic. It's exactly what collectors did. As former Comics International news editor Phil Hall recalls, fans were buying 5 copies to keep pristine and unopened, and a 6th to tear into and read. Nostalgic young adults who were only kids in the 70s and 80s found themselves with plenty of disposable income and a need to reclaim their comic collections of the past. Marvel and other publishers were only too eager to supply them with a plethora of titles and trading cards, flooding the market. Then the bubble burst. Between 1993 and 1996, revenues from comics and trading cards began to collapse. Suddenly, Marvel, which at one point seemed invincible, now looked vulnerable. Despite this, Marvel's then owner, investment banker, and businessman Ronald Perelman was interested in taking the company public, so he decided to increase the prices and volume of titles within Marvel. Perelman reasoned, quite correctly, that if he raised prices and output, that hardcore Marvel fans would devote a larger and larger portion of their disposable income towards buying comics. Chuck Rosansky, CEO of Mile High Comics, wrote, "Once he had enough sales numbers in place to prove his hypothesis, he then took Marvel public, selling 40% of its stock for vastly more than he paid for the entire company." The flaw in his plan, however, was that he promised investors in Marvel even further brand extensions and more price increases. That this plan was clearly impossible became evident to most comic retailers early in 1993, as more and more fans simply quit collecting due to the high cost and amid a widespread perception of declining quality in Marvel Comics. The collapse was painful in the extreme. Hundreds of comic book retailers went out of business as sales tumbled by 70%. Suddenly, the boom had turned to bust. By 1995, Marvel Entertainment was heavily in debt. Yet Perelman decided to set up Marvel Studios, a venture which he hoped would finally get the company's most famous characters on the big screen. Marvel's shareholders resisted, arguing that the financial damage to Marvel's share prices would be too great. Perelman's response was to file for bankruptcy. Marvel filed Chapter 11 bankruptcy on December 27, 1996. Coincidentally, its highest debt of $1.7 million was owed to Disney. Over 1/3 of Marvel employees were laid off. And that was the end of Marvel. They were never heard from again. Oh, that story's for another time. It was during this period in the mid-90s that Marvel and DC Comics began to look quite different. You see, Marvel and DC were toying with different paper stock as early as 1990 for their newsstand lines. The most famous example is the February 1991 Marvels, which feature a completely different cover stock that has been ever used before. Starting around 1994, the X titles had both deluxe and regular editions, where the deluxe was the better printing and the regular was regular newsprint for each issue. And then the newsprint editions were dropped, leaving just the better printing as the norm by 1995 or 1996. By 1996, in the modern age of Marvel Comics, card and video game advertisers were having a field day. In this issue, there are ads for Overpower, which was a collectible card game produced by Fleer Corporation featuring characters from Marvel Comics, among others. In the game, 2 players went head-to-head with teams of 4 heroes and villains. These cards eventually stopped circulation in around 2001. Another advertiser I saw was Mega Hero Collector Series. This company sold statues and other figurines predominantly from various comic book titles, similar to what Sideshow Collectibles and McFarlane Toys do today. Marvel purchased card company Skybox for $150 million in 1995 and merged it with their existing company Fleer. Fleer Skybox then produced a DC vs. Marvel card set between 1995 and 1996. PlayStation was showing off its line of sports-themed games, including NHL Face-Off and NFL Game Day, while Nintendo was amping up its fighting game, Mortal Kombat 3. Retailers were still in the fight. The previously mentioned Mile High Comics from Denver, Colorado had a full-page ad featuring their comics available. Their main enticement was the ability to order by phone. I was happy to see that Mile High Comics still exists in Denver, Colorado. If you're in the area, check them out at 4600 Jason Street, Denver. Shout out to you guys. Thanks for checking out this video. If you want to see more, please hit like and subscribe. If you have suggestions for comics you want me to deep dive into, please leave a comment below. Please help and support real artists. AI is great for a lot of things, but not for creating art and replacing artists. Thank you.